Hey everyone, welcome back to Bagel TCG. Today we're going to be doing a very early on deck tech and discussion for Jarl Vetreidi, who is the newest Guardian hero coming out in his Armory deck in November. Of course, you probably mostly know me for my Guardian gameplay. Uh, Guardian is by far my favorite class. I'm quite sad how weak it is at the moment. I think both Bravo and Victor are not very good, and they just pushed the mastery set for Guardian. It's supposed to come out in like April, and they pushed it to August. So we're not going to be getting a lot of strong Guardian stuff anytime soon, I think, except Jarl here. So I'm really hoping he's powerful and can carry the Guardian class and make it something relevant again. And I think he will, because he has Essence of Earth and Ice. And if we know anything about Earth and Ice Guardians like Oldhim or Starvo, the only two that have existed are both living legends, and they're very powerful. So I'm hoping he can make good use out of that toolkit. He has an ability as well that's very interesting, but I'm not sure how consistently it'll get pulled off. This, like I said, is a very early deck tech because we don't have the deck list yet. We don't even, I think, have all the spoilers. So I'm sure there is cards that will change how this deck will end up that haven't been released yet. I'm positive this will not be the final list or maybe even close to it. But I think it's good to have an early deck tech like this and discussion just to one, just get hyped about this, because if you're a Guardian lover like I am, or if you loved Oldhim or Starvo like I did, you're probably pretty hyped for this deck and this hero to come out, but also to get the, theory crafting juices flowing for what this deck could look like. So his ability is whenever you play an ice card, create a frostbite token in an opponent's exposed head, chest, arms, or leg zone. So what that means is if there is an empty zone, right? So if they have used the equipment themselves and it's been destroyed, like it had blade break, or they destroyed it, or if you destroy their equipment, now it's exposed. And if you play an ice card, you can put a frostbite in that zone, and now they essentially have that frostbite. So it works like a normal frostbite. If they play a card, it costs one extra, and then the frostbite's destroyed. But the only difference is you kind of have to work to make that happen, because the equipment zones need to be empty before you can do anything. If they have all four equipment, your hero ability is essentially blank, right? So you need to have them use it, or you need to destroy it somehow. And then, if all four zones are empty and you play four ice cards on your turn, all with go again, you can give them four frostbites. I don't think that's more realistic. I think most likely you want them to. You really only care about the first zone being exposed and maybe the second zone being exposed, because you probably can't play that many ice cards every turn anyways. But it's really important, I think, to at least get that first zone exposed, and then you can start giving them one frostbite every turn a lot more consistently. So the most important part, of course, is the essence of Earth and Ice. I don't think the hero ability is very strong up top, and I think that's intentional because they know that I believe like Earth and Ice Guardians have like probably the biggest card pool in the game by quite a bit. You have such a massive well to draw on from elemental cards, earth cards, ice cards, guardian cards, and generics. You have like 5 different card pools that you can pull from, and you can make some really interesting decks. Um, Going into the equipment, I think some of the guardian stuff that's already just best in slot: Civic Steps, 3 block legs. We also have Gauntlets of Iron Will, 3 block arms, pretty good. Fyendal Spring Tunic, usually the best chest piece for Guardian, and probably will stay that way, at least for now. And then Cornet Peak is what I'm using as the headpiece at the moment. This is interesting. Of course, I wish it could be Crown of Seeds, but I think Cornet Peak, against a lot of aggro decks at least, is going to be better use than of your blue than swinging weapon, right? Because this will make them, unless they have Tunic up, and then of course you should not use this. If they have no easy way to make a resource, this will make them trade a card with you, right? They have to discard a card or pay 1, so they'll just pitch a card. And so you slow them down still, which is pretty nice. I mean, your weapon, there's currently no great weapon for Jarl. I'm pretty confident, like I would give it like 90% chance that he has a two-handed weapon in the armory deck that somehow interacts with armor, like puts -1 counters on armor when it hits, or destroys armor. Probably putting -1 counters on armor when it hits though, because he, in all of his art, there's a lot of art of him. He has this massive weapon. This is him as well. You can see it better here. This is him with the big weapon. I'm guessing he's gonna have a two-handed weapon, but once again, we don't have that yet. So at the moment, he has no good weapon. So I think Coronet Peak is usually a better use of your blue than Swinging Weapon, especially into aggro decks. You do get the very, very broken Stalagmite. This is the Ice Guardian Shield. This card's insane. It blocks for 3, 2 and then 1. And every time you defend with it, you also give them a Frostbite. So you can pretty easily tell a lot of time how many resources your opponent is going to use and what they need on their turn. And you can just throw this out there, disrupt a really powerful turn when they just don't have the resources for everything. I honestly don't care what your weapon is. You can use any of the hammers as long as you have Stalagmite. That's the broken part. Now let's get into the deck. Of course, if we want to actually utilize the hero ability, we're gonna want to play some number of ice cards, and so we are focusing a lot more heavily on the ice aspect than the earth aspect. There's a very different version of the deck that I think could be interesting based around decompose. You can see in the maybe board here, you can do something kind of Florian-like with Felling of the Crown, red and yellow Rootbound Carapace, and then Plow Under, and you can basically be a Guardian version of Florian if you want to do that. But I'm not confident Florian's not just the better deck, right? So why would we try to be Florian when you can just play Florian? I'm going to try, at least in this initial version, to lean more into the ice aspect, which is what our hero ability cares about and what differentiates us from Florian. Because Florian's already kind of an Earth Guardian, right? He plays this very slow, grindy Earth gameplay. I think if you want an Earth Guardian, you should probably just play Florian, and Jarl is going to be more of our Ice Guardian. And you can already see that with how our equipment is 2 ice pieces, right? Also, ice historically is just like the best of the elements. So let's look at the new cards that we have. So we first have this block card that's a Jarl specialization called Unforgetting Unforgiving. Now it's a 4 block card, so it's already fine. Obviously, block cards, even though there's a generic one with Test of Strength, are not played very much because they're very, very inflexible. You can only block with them. You can't block with them from Arsenal. This only really works if your opponent's attacking you, and it only works well if they attack you for at least 4. So it's very, very specific situation. But it has a pretty good high roll if you get it off. It says, when this defends, if the attacking hero controls an equipment with a -1 counter, you can search your deck for a mangle, banish it, then shuffle. You may play it during your next action phase. So if you can first get a -1 counter on your opponent's equipment, on any of them, and then you block with this, it's kind of drawing a card, right? Because you get to search your deck for a mangle, banish it, and you can play it next turn. So this is replacing itself. Then it's really, really good. Then you're doing like the Test of Strength thing in Victor. How good is Mangle? Mangle's a pretty bad card, but it works really well with our deck, and I think is worth running with Unforgetting Unforgiving. The biggest issue with Mangle is that it costs 4, so it's really inefficient pitch-wise, because if you pitch 2 blues, it's three cards for 8 damage, which is really horrible, which I think is really where we want Tunic. I think you probably should not be using your Tunic aggressively in this deck. I think you should only be using your Tunic for Mangle and for Command and Conquer Pummel. Like, those are probably the only 2 things you should be using it for, and you should probably just let it sit on 3 counters unless you draw Mangle or CNC Pummel. Especially because when you draw your Unforgetting Unforgiving, you want to get that Mangle off. And if you can use a blue plus Tunic for this, it's just a 2-card 8, which is really good. It has a nice crush effect where you can destroy an equipment with a -1 counter, which they're going to actually want to block, because otherwise you then get an exposed equipment slot for Jarl. So they're probably going to have to block this for 5, which you're happy with as well. And then you're getting a 3-card, 2-card 12, right? Because this blocks, gives you the free Mangle, so this doesn't count as a card. You got it for free. And then you pitch a blue plus Tunic to play this. So it's just the blue and the block card. Blocks for 4 and then swings for 8. So you're getting 6 value per card, which is really incredible. But it relies heavily, heavily on having your Tunic counter up. So I think it's going to be important to be much more patient and conservative with that Tunic counter. And then this is a really good combo, right? Because even if you don't care about the crush effect, which you do, it's still a 2-card 12, which is pretty amazing. So it is important to get that -1 counter on an opponent's equipment first. And we are playing some other stuff, like his other new specialization to do this. This is, first of all, an Ice Earth action aura, which is great. It's both your elements. It'll help a lot with fusing. It's also a blue, and it blocks for 3. So this card's pretty insane. We're never, ever going to cut this. There's maybe a world in the future where you don't play the Mangle Unforgetting, Unforgiving combo. You just cut both of them because they're not very good. But there's like 0% chance you ever cut Crumble to Eternity. It's too good for just being a blue 3-block Ice Earth action. Does everything you want already. But it says when this enters, you can put a -1 counter on an equipment. So obviously this is meant to combo with your other specialization. If you play this first and then put a -1 counter on an equipment, and then you essentially get lucky and you have to draw the block after, you can then find the Mangle, and then you get everything going together because you have that -1 counter to get this triggered. Then you have the Mangle, which can then crush them and destroy it. So a very great little triangle synergy there. It also has the second effect, which says at the beginning of your action phase, destroy this, then your next attack this turn gets dominate. So in the like ideal world that they're dreaming up here, you play Crumble to Eternity, you put a -1 counter on an equipment that you want to destroy, then you draw up into Unforgetting, Unforgiving. You block with it, you get the free Mangle, and then on your turn, this activates giving the Mangle dominate, and you play the Mangle. So this is like, yeah, of course, best case scenario, but it is pretty insane if it happens. You get a, with Tunic counter, you have block for 4, 2-card 8 dominate that lets you destroy any equipment you want. Like, really, really strong combo there. It's, like I said, high rolly, but can happen. I think those are all the new cards before I move on to the normal cards. Yeah, those are all the new cards, at least, that I'm playing. Oh, no, sorry. We have Channel Mount Eisen. This one I think is not that impressive, but we're going to play it because it's a 3-block. There's not that many ice cards that are 3 blocks, so we kind of need to play all of them. Although there's more now because they just printed 2 more. But this is a 0-cost ice action aura. It's a 3-block with Go Again. It says at the start of each hero's turn, they lose life equal to the number of frostbites in their equipment zones. And then it has the normal channel effect, so to keep it around, you have to bottom an ice card from your pitch zone. Yeah, it's pretty unimpressive. I mean, they might have 1 or 2 frostbites, so it'll give you like 1 or 2 damage. But it's like whatever. It's mostly just being a blue ice card that blocks 3. Now, they also printed this, which is a blue ice card that blocks 3, because before, there were only 2. There was just Winter's Grasp, which is just a super vanilla card that you're never going to resolve, like 2 for 4 attack. It's really bad, but it's a blue 3-block ice card, which is good. And then, of course, the classic Channel Lake Frigid. Another 2-cost 3-block ice action. This one has Go Again. This one's insane. It says cards and activated abilities cost opposing hero an additional resource. So this taxes everything by 1. This is definitely one of your best cards to resolve, and you should usually resolve it when you get it. It's just so good, especially when you can keep it around. But to keep it around, you need good ice cards to draw, and so that's why having the other 3-block ice cards are so good. Now, since they printed these 2 new ones in the Armory deck, we have 12 total 3-block ice cards, which is pretty good. You might have noticed that there's a lot of auras in this deck. We're also playing Hypothermia. This is just a 2-block ice card, but it's also really good. It costs 0, which is nice, and it says attacks you control can't gain Go Again. Sounds weird, but you get to put it under an opponent's control because it's an affliction. We don't see a lot of afflictions in Flesh and Blood. It's a rare type, but you give the opponent the affliction of Hypothermia, and then on their turn, none of their attacks can get Go Again. At the end of the turn, this gets destroyed. So for one of their full turns, they don't get any Go Again. It's pretty amazing into certain decks. Any kind of aggro deck that wants to go super wide. If you saw my video a few days ago about Viscerai that wants to like play 4 Go Again cards, most of the aggro decks right now want to play like 4 Go Again cards a turn or 3. This just ends their whole turn, right? They can only play 1 action. So it's pretty absurd. You don't need to resolve it into everything. I mean, sorry, like most Guardians, it's probably pretty bad into, but you know, it's still in a blue ice card, so you just play it into everything. But like I was saying, there's a lot of auras in this deck. There's 1 with Hypothermia, 2 with Crumble to Eternity, 3 with Channel Mount Eisen, and 4 with Channel Lake Frigid. And so we're playing, I think this card's a little slept on right now. I wouldn't be surprised if it shoots up a bunch in price when this deck comes out. Maybe there's a lot of it because I think Everfest was printed a lot. But Imposing Visage is kind of insane in this deck. This was been a sleeper card in Guardian for a long time. It's always been okay. Like, I think it was decent in Bravo. Um, it's always been just fine, not amazing. But in this deck, it's crazy because it lets you search your deck for an aura card with cost X or less, put it into the arena, then shuffle. It's also just a blue 3 block with Go Again. It costs X plus 3, so you always have to pay 3, and then you pay whatever the cost of the aura you want is. So we have quite a lot of zero costs. We have three three of the 4 auras are zero cost with Channel Mount Eisen, Crumble to Eternity, and Hypothermia. So if it's that, you just pitch a blue and then you find it. If you want Channel Lake Frigid, of course you have to pitch 2 cards, so maybe you won't do that as often, but you can. It's pretty insane. This deck's going to be really good if you get to go first, because you can play all of these auras without kind of any negative downside of that. And with Imposing Visage, you'll have 15 different versions of finding an aura turn 0, which is pretty absurd. Like 1 in 4 cards you draw, right? So you should almost always find it unless you low roll. So that's pretty great. Other blues, I think we're just playing some of the basics. We're playing the Winter's Grasp, like I said. We're playing Autumn's Touch. This is the other basic. This is the Earth 3-block blue. Just playing it because it's an Earth card and it blocks 3. Macho Grande we're playing along with Glacial Footsteps as our blue closers. So Macho Grande is the classic 8 Dominate on a blue, but it costs 7. So in the late game, you try to get 2 blues plus Tunic to close the game with this. Or we can close with Glacial Footsteps. This is the elemental version. It only costs 6, so you don't need Tunic, but to give it Dominate, you have to fuse it with an ice card, so you need that extra card anyways. Both are good ways to close the game. I think the only other card I haven't touched on for blues is Blizzard. We're only playing 2 because this card doesn't block, which is pretty bad. I think it's our only non-block in the main deck. Yeah, but it has a really, really good effect. It says target attack loses and can't gain Go Again unless the attacking hero pays 2 resources. So, of course, very, very good into aggro decks. Usually turning their turn off unless they just happen to have 2 resources floating around. So, a kind of another version of Hypothermia, but Hypothermia blocks 2, so it's a bit better than Blizzard. You can also find it with Imposing, so that's why we're only playing 2 copies of Blizzard here. The nice thing you do have to remember too is if your opponent has an exposed zone, you're playing an ice card, so you'll also give them a frostbite on top of this, which gives you a bigger advantage from playing all these other ice cards here as well. I don't know if I mentioned, but we do have Pulse of Eisenloft. This is a legendary, so we only can play 1 copy of it, but it says it's a Ice Earth defense reaction, blocks for 6, costs 2, and it says Ice, Earth, and Elemental action cards have +1 while defending this turn. Pretty good. Mostly it's an Ice Earth card, and we want all these Ice Earth cards because of Oaken Old. Like, this is our best attack in the deck for sure. It's only costing 3, and it attacks for 7, so 3 for 7 is fine, but it says if it was fused, it gains +2, Dominate, and if this hits a hero, they put 2 random cards from their hand on the bottom of their deck in any order. Now that's really, really good. Then it's 3 for 9 Dominate with the on hit of them getting rid of 2 cards, which is like probably the best attack in the game or one of them. But you do have to fuse it, which means you have to reveal an ice and an earth card from your hands. Now, before, the only card that was both was Pulse of Eisenloft. So if you reveal this, you get the full effect. But they just printed 3 more copies with Crumble to Eternity. So now you have 4 cards that you can reveal. And then this comes in for that 9. They're also, none of these are bad to Arsenal after, because of course this doesn't have Go Again, so you'll end your turn with the card you fused. You can keep it in hand, but it's probably better just to Arsenal it if you can. You can also, of course, reveal an Earth and an Ice card. We're only playing these 3 normal Earth cards, but then you have plenty of Ice cards to reveal. But, you know, most of the time you're hoping to draw it with one of the Ice-Earth combo cards there. Other cards in the deck that we haven't touched too. Spinal Crush, of course, it's a classic Guardian card. 5 for 9 is a pretty bad rate for damage, but it has an insane effect of once again getting rid of their Go Again if it crushes. So we do have, if you can't tell, a lot of ways to get rid of Go Again with Spinal Crush, Hypothermia here, and Blizzard. And then we have the classic Command and Conquer Pummel combo. We're playing Tunic, so it just makes sense. And then this is the last card. It's the card that I'm most iffy on, and I think there's like an under 10% chance it actually makes the final deck. Because of course I expect a lot more cards to be revealed for the Armory deck. So I think that it's very unlikely this makes the final deck, but it's not bad. It's a 3 for 7, but if it was fused, it gains if this hits, create a frostbite. Frostbite can be pretty disruptive to a lot of decks, so 3 for 7 tax your opponent is pretty good, but fusing is not an amazing mechanic. That card usually has to get arsenaled, and depends if you want to play that or not. Fusing is fine with Oaken Old because this card's just so broken, but yeah, I think it's unlikely Snow Under makes the final version, but I needed to get to 80 cards. It's in here for now. I think maybe I would change it for some more blues. We're only at 30 blues at the moment, so maybe I would do something more like adding in one of these cards. We have these cards that I'm pretty interested in, which are Polar Blast and Cold Snap. Also, Winter's Bite could be good as well. Maybe we'll just add those in. I'll discuss those more in a second, but maybe we'll say 33 blues is a bit better. 30 is fine because that's 2 blues per hand, and we only really need 1 blue most of the time. If you're just throwing Command & Conquer, Mangle, Oaken Old, any of these combos, especially with Tunic, are like a single blue card, or throwing Weapon or Coronet Peak. So we only really need 1 blue for a lot of hands. But a lot of times we need 2 blues if you're going to fuse with one of them and pitch the other for Oaken Old, or 2 blues for Spinal Crush, or a blue plus Channel Lake Frigid is 2 blues. So that's why 30 is the best number to usually have 2 blues per hand, but I think 33, I guess, will hedge us a little more towards having 3 blues. Now looking at the sideboard, I have Balance of Justice. I think this is the better headpiece, of course, if you expect your opponent to draw 2. I've got the 3 copies of Arcane Barrier. You'll usually, I think, use the boots into like AB1 decks, like Viscerai or Aurora or Florian, and then the other 2 pieces are into Wizards. I've got Time Skippers for Prism, Sledge of Anvilheim. Not sure if this is necessary, but probably good to have into stuff like Enigma or Prism. I think you'd probably lose those decks anyways, but maybe you can hedge into it. We also have the Zealous Belting and the E-Strikes for if we need to go more aggro. That's usually best if you have the Sledge here. Of course, Sledge is also pretty good with Tunic, because if you have the 4th resource off Tunic, it's a 1-card 6. Pretty great. And then the more normal cards we're going to play are these Fate for Scenes and Sink Belows, just to block better, right? They both are 4 blocks, and then Weakest Link is pretty good at the moment. Maybe you fit Erase Face in here as well. I think all of those 2 for 6s really depends on the meta, but they're all pretty good. But you'll probably always want this Fate for Scene and the Sink Belows. The last card I have here is Exposed to the Elements. This card's like really good on the surface for our game plan. It costs 2. If you fuse it with Earth, you get to put a -1 counter on equipment. And if you fuse it with Ice, you get to destroy an equipment with 0 block, unless they pay 2 resources. So they can kind of play around the Ice part. Of course, we have more Earth Ice cards now. We have 4 copies of Earth Ice with Crumble and Pulse. So it's possible to do this pretty often, but it just doesn't block. That's like the biggest issue, right? It doesn't block. Also, it costs 2, which is kind of clunky. If this costs 0, it'd be a lot better. Or if it blocked like at least 2, it would be a lot better. But it doesn't have either of those, so I think it might be too clunky for the deck. I think it might end up being too slow. But maybe you want like 1 copy of this, because the first one, of course, like I said, getting the first exposed zone is important, because then every time you play an ice card like Blizzard, Channel Lake Frigid, Channel Mount Eisen, Crumble to Eternity, all the ice cards we have, then you want them to get at least that first Frostbite. So I think it's really, really important to get that first equipment zone empty. I don't think you care really. Maybe the second one will matter sometimes, but really getting the first one is what matters the most. You're never going to be playing 4 ice cards in a turn, so you don't care that much about getting every zone exposed, and it's unrealistic to get every zone exposed. But I think getting the first zone empty is going to be really important. So maybe you want like 1 copy of this, but 3 just sounds kind of absurd. I have them in the sideboard because maybe against like Enigma or Prism or something like that, you're fine with extra blues anyways, because you need to throw your big weapon around. But yeah, I'm not sure. Let's look at what I have in the maybe board here, because like I said, this is not just a deck tech. I also want to discuss the potential of the hero. There's quite a lot of good options. Like I said, he has a massive card pool. So looking at first I'll just briefly discuss that decompose plan. So you can play Felling the Crown, red and yellow rootbound carapace, plow under, all good. You can play well grounded, which are better boots, and then you can even play bark skin. This is a pretty nice chest piece, but and we have a lot of 3-block non-attack, so it actually synergizes pretty well with our blues. But I think our deck leans on tunic a little too much to switch, and that's the main reason. Honestly, I'm not doing the decompose plan because we really want tunic for mangle. We really want tunic for command and conquer pummel. I think if you remove all of that, like you take out command and conquer pummel, or at least pummel, and mangle, and unforgetting, unforgiving, like all 9 cards, then you can switch to this off of tunic. But I don't really think it's worth it. For other Earth cards, the only other Earth cards in the version that we're playing right now that I would consider is probably Fruits of the Forest is really nice. It might even be better than Autumn's Touch. I think, of course, the main thing holding it back is that it only blocks for 2, but it's so good to fuse this because the current issue is, right, if you fuse, let's say you're attacking with Oaken Old, and you want to fuse an Earth and an Ice card, and you fuse Autumn's Touch and Winter's Grass, which are really bad to fuse, right? You don't really want to arsenal either one. Or let's say you fuse Autumn's Touch and a good Ice card, like Channel Lake Frigid. You're almost definitely going to arsenal that Channel Lake Frigid, right? And then you just kind of waste the Autumn's Touch, like it just sits in your hand, and you IP penalty yourself. But with Fruits of the Forest, you can instant speed discard it to gain 2 life, so you actually are always going to get that 2 value. So if you fuse it, you still just discard it to get 2 life, which is like almost as good as Sigil of Solace, but it also is an Earth Blue that blocks 2. Like it's almost a strict upgrade to Sigil of Solace. Of course, it's not because Sigil of Solace gains you 3 life, but I mean, this is a blue and it can block and it can fuse. Like, yeah, it's pretty absurd. It might be worth running over Autumn's Touch, or maybe in addition, like maybe we need more than 7 Earth cards in our deck. Maybe we want to go to 10 Earth cards, and then I could see Fruits of the Forest is probably the best. Since we do have to do some awkward arsenals sometimes, Seeds of Tomorrow could be worth considering. Lets you bottom your arsenal and then prevent the next 5. It's pretty nice. I mean, it's a 2-card block 5, which is kind of inefficient, but it lets you do like really bad arsenals and then fix it later with Seeds of Tomorrow. But I think since it doesn't block, it's a little clunky. Also, you can't really arsenal it unless you find the second Seeds of Tomorrow, and that's a bit clunky as well. So that Fertile Ground I just have here for the same reason as Fruits of the Forest, but it's obviously like much worse than Fruits of the Forest, so I don't think it's really worth considering. Stamp Authorities here as like, yeah, another aura we could tutor. I think Rouse the Ancients, we don't have enough big attacks to play. I'm not going to talk about everything I have in this maybe board, but the only cards I want to touch on are, I think there's a world, and maybe they should be in this deck, that we play Polar Blast and Cold Snap. The only thing holding me back on these is that they're 2 blocks, right? Which is not great. But if you get to play them from Arsenal, it's 1 cost, play it from Arsenal, draw a card. So it replaces itself outside of the resource, which is really nice. Especially, once again, Tunic is really good in this deck. If you play this off Tunic, you draw the card. But the main thing is they're replacing themselves, right? So it's a card, you pitch, you play it, you replace it. That's really nice. You have 2 floating, so you can pretty easily play Command and Conquer or Spinal Crush or Weakest Link after. And it's an ice card with Go Again, so you give your opponent a Frostbite, which is what's really making me want to play them, right? So maybe... Yeah, the blues are just so good in this deck, it's hard to make cuts. Like, maybe Channel Mount Eisen's just so bad, because this card seems pretty bad, that it should be Cold Snap or Polar Blast, but it blocks for 3. So I think my Guardian Brain is really wanting to just block. So I'm playing the block cards, the cards that block for 3, like Channel Mount Eisen. Maybe there's a world where instead of Autumn's Touch, we're supposed to have Fruits of the Forest, and instead of Channel Mount Eisen, we're supposed to have Cold Snap, stuff like that. Maybe that's better. They're both way better to fuse and then Arsenal, so those are some things to consider, but we're getting to 30 minutes, and I could talk for so long about Guardian. I'm really, really excited about this deck. Please leave some comments below about what you think about the deck, what direction you're taking it. Remember to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.